So I've got crime, horror, sci-fi, and I've even got a romance. So let's just jump right in. So book one was from my book list category, and I wish I could say that I was excited to read this book, but it's actually one in a series. I can't remember which one it is. I think it may be fourth. And I read the third one as part of a book list. The last book list I read, and it was the only book I read that month because it took me so long to get through it. But this is Iron Gold by Pierce Brown, and it's part of the Red Rising series. I'm not gonna lie to you, I always get confused between sci-fi and fantasy, because to me they're kind of all lumping together, but I have it on good authority that this one is sci-fi. So if you were expecting a wizard, turn away now. So this book takes place 10 years after the events of the previous book, which was called Morning Star. And as with the rest of the books in the Red Rising series, the main protagonist is called Darrow. He's also known as the Reaper, and I think he has like multiple other nicknames at this point. It's very much based on or following the events of the last one, so there's very little I can say about his part in the book that isn't going to spoil something. All I will say is he is not the only perspective that you see in this book. You also get introduced to or have chapters from the perspectives of 3 other characters. So you have Lyria, I think that's how you pronounce it, who is a young girl or teenager who has been liberated from the mines, but she's found that actually she isn't any better off. You've got F, who is a thief, but he also was a one-time member of Darrow's uprising. And then you've got Lysander, who I can't tell you who he is, basically. And obviously you've got all of the sidekicks and the gang that surround Darrow as well. Although there are 4 main characters that you see the perspective of, there are so many secondary characters that I've personally found it really hard to keep track of who was who. I don't know what the gap was between when they were published, so I assume that if you did read them back to back or consistently, you'd remember, but that's how I've approached it. I think there is a bit in the beginning of the book that gives you a refresher, and I think there's a list of characters if I'm remembering rightly, but because I read the book on Kindle, it's just so much of a faff to keep flipping backwards and forwards just to figure out if we've met that person before in the series or if they're new. So yeah, that's my first point about it. The subplot that I personally liked the best was Lyria's. I'll call her Lyria for the purpose of this video. I found hers to be the most interesting and also the easiest to follow. I guess because she's a new character, her subplot gets really tense and you really that really does pull you in, whereas some of the others is a bit more drawn out. You've got to wait quite a long time for it to get going. The last book, Morning Star, was so tense pretty much the whole way through, and I think that's one of the reasons why it took me so long to read it, whereas this one, it still took me a while to get through it, but it was more, and it still did get intense, but towards the end, I would say. I'm not gonna lie, I don't tend to mind violence in books. Actually, especially in crime, I prefer it when it's a bit more violent and gritty, but in this book, it feels like there's just so much violence just for the sake of it. Even when they're not fighting and they're not at war, there are just limbs being hacked off everywhere. You can't look for someone's hand being chopped off. It just my personal opinion, because I also found it quite hard in general to picture what was being described in my mind. And I don't know if it's because I'm not a sci-fi fan and I haven't read that many sci-fi books, and that's why I can't place myself in that world. It's when it talks about the weapons that they use or the ships that they're on. It's not that I don't care, because I'm trying to get myself into the story, but I just find it very hard to place myself in that world and to imagine everything happening around me. And fans of sci-fi might find that a lot easier. So I will say that. If you're not aware that there is a book after this one, I apologise. Spoiler alert. It's out there on Amazon for all to see. I did not realise when I was reading this until I got about 68% through, and I was like, shouldn't something be happening right now? And I just find books like that really disappointing, especially after the intensity of the last one. There was also, I'm trying to be careful if I can actually say this or not, there was also a death. I'm not going to say who, but you're literally like, is that it? And it just didn't, I don't know. Maybe because there's something that's going to happen in the next book, but I don't know. I don't think it is actually. And it just felt like a bit, I don't know, flat. But yeah, I won't say anymore. I do not want to spoil it for anybody. I'm trying to be very careful. But yeah, to me it just felt like it never really got going until the end. But then again, as I said before, if you can picture yourself in this world, maybe you are more immersed and engaged than I was. I remember reading this on the train coming back from a work trip and just willing it to end because it just felt never ending. As soon as you think you're there, it just keeps going. And I think that probably says more about the fact that it's not the type of book for me. And it probably sounds like I hate the book, and I don't. Like, there are parts that are interesting and engaging, and like I said, I really like Lyria's subplot. It's just really, it's not my type of book. Can't really say more than that. For the rating, it might actually surprise you that I gave this book a 6 out of 10. It wasn't terrible and I didn't hate it. It's just not really for me. But I think there was enough in there to lift it to be just above average. Fans of sci-fi, you might love this series, and that's okay. But yeah, that is book 1 of February. Book 2 is another Kindle book, and this one is actually in my self-development category. If you watched my January wrap-up, you'll know that my reading order got a little squiggled at the end of the month, so we're a little bit out of sync. This is called When You're Ready, This Is How You Heal. This book is a collection of essays all about loss, letting go, taking a leap of faith or confidence. Basically anything that can help you reassess where you currently are in life, and then giving yourself like the grace to move forward. And the author is Brianna, I don't know how you say her last name, Wiest, W-I-E-S-T. So there were definitely a few essays in this book that made me feel very seen, and they were very comforting. I remember the very first one is about letting yourself feel what you need to feel, and not bottling it up, and that it's okay to feel like these intense emotions. And I think that one is centered around loss, but it's not just loss in a death sense. Loss of a job, loss of a relationship, loss in whatever form it takes for you. I read it right at a moment that I felt like I needed to hear it or read it. I mean, it made me feel genuinely emotional, so I really like that. And there are quite a few essays in a similar kind of vein. There's one that is about 8 signs that you're of my favourite quotes and something that I always fall back on is, "This too shall pass." And I always think about that when I'm really nervous about something or scared or I just have a lot of doubt. It's that idea that it won't last forever. It will get better. And you just have to hold on to that. There are so many essays in this book that I think a lot of people could really do with hearing. There's just so much pressure from all angles of life. I know a lot of, I don't know much about world economics, but I know in England we have a cost of living crisis at the moment. There's a lot of anxiety, a lot of angst, a lot of uncertainty, and not that it's going to cure all your problems, but I think there are some essays that can help you embrace the feeling and help take steps to make yourself feel more confident in your approach to life. And maybe you feel unsure about making a career decision because of everything that's happening in the world right now, and this helps you to understand where the nerves are rooted in and how you may be holding yourself back. What I will say is I've read a collection of Brianna's essays before. I think it was 101 essays to change the way you think, and like with that one, there are a few essays that are very descriptive, but probably overly so, to the point where I don't actually fully understand the message that she's trying to relay out of it. I much prefer the more direct ones that she has. So there are ones that are more just direct, plain language, I guess is the word to say. But there are also listicle essays, which I also really like. So there's something about 10 ways to love yourself, or 8 ways that emotionally intelligent people approach situations. So yeah, there's a lot in there that I can take from, but there are also some where I'm a bit like, your eyes glaze over and you are reading but you're not really reading, and then all of a sudden you come back to the world and you don't know what you've just read. It's like that. Some of them. I read it because it specifically said it was about loss, but I actually think a lot of it is just about life in general. I'm going to read you a line from the book because it was an absolute read. So it says, "Your big mistakes in life never occurred because you were blind to their consequences. They occurred because you deluded yourself into thinking it was the right thing to do when you knew it wasn't." When I read that, I literally was like, is she here? There's that whole idea around self-sabotage and breaking that cycle, and that really was it makes you sit up and think, yeah, that is so true, but I've just never really thought of it in that way. On to the rating. I gave this book a 7 out of 10. As much as I felt comfort from it, it didn't blow me away. And like I said, there are some that you're a bit but it was good. And I do recommend it for anyone who just needs that pep talk, confidence boost. So that is book 2. Book 3 is, my reading order was still messed up at this point. So we've swung all the way back to book list. And so we have a book from the romance category. I'm going to read you the blurb on the back of this one. "It's high time for Stella Lane to settle down and find a husband. Also, her mother tells her, this is no easy task for a wealthy she's really endearing. Pretty much immediately when you read the book, or when I read the book, sorry, I knew I was going to like her. And I think it's because the author herself is neurodivergent, and so there's a lot more sympathy around the character. You know, when some authors write characters that they don't know the experience of, and so it just feels a little jarring, whereas it's not the case with this one. I do think when it comes to the romance genre, I find myself being very cynical, and maybe that says more about my experience than anything else, but it's just this idea that two people meet and then they're like instantly obsessed with each other. Maybe that has happened for other people, but yeah, I just find it too, a little unrealistic, but also the way romance books are written, or actually, I shouldn't lump them all in together, the way some romance books are written, there are parts in this one that just really make me cringe. Like Michael says the word flicks instead of movies, and this man is like 30. I mean, I don't know anybody that says flicks. Let's go to the flicks. No. And then also, there are points in the book where it's like Michael growled in frustration. Is that sexy? If somebody growled at you, would you be turned on? And I feel like it obviously doesn't mean it quite like literally like that, but it really reminds me of these TikToks that act out these literal descriptions from romance books, and I just can't get that out of my head. I guess it just like keeps me out of the moment. There are also times in the book where they get very hot and heavy in front of his family, and I find that really like odd. Like, I don't know anybody that wouldn't be mortified if that happened. Yeah, I'm like, that's not sexy. That's not cool or cute. But the family don't care, and they all like joke about it, and I'm just like, ooh, that would make me, like, my insides just shrivel up. There are also some very melodramatic things, or things are blown out of proportion, that just made me roll my eyes. But I think, again, it comes into the fact that I'm just not a romance girly. It is not my genre. And I do understand that a lot of people read romance books for the escapism, not because they're really super realistic. You want to pretend that this could happen. I do get that. And I will say, if you do like it for the escapism, this book, the spice level is... it does not hold back. I sometimes make notes on my phone while I'm reading books, and for this one, I literally wrote, do people actually read books like this in public? And I never thought, and I never would, I don't consider myself to be a prude, but apparently, apparently I am, because I was shocked. Yeah, so if you like that kind of thing, get on board with the Kiss Quotient. Oh my god, I don't think I ever by the end I was just pissed off with him. It all felt very predictable, and there are a lot of tropes in here that are very standard. I don't know if that is something that people look for in romance, that they want these things, but yeah, it got really a bit much for me towards the end. Yeah, so whereas I was hanging in there throughout, by the end I was just like, just end now, please. I'm done. I don't think it will come as a surprise that I rated this book a 4 out of 10. It's just really not for me. If you like romance, then maybe you would like this. I liked the character of Stella, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with being a romantic at heart. Maybe I'm just too cynical for books like this. But if you have a romance book that you think a cynic would enjoy, feel free to suggest it in the comments. But yeah, 4 out of 10, unfortunately, for the Kiss Quotient. Book 4 is back into personal choice, and well, not back into personal choice, it's actually the first personal choice book of this month, and it is back in my wheelhouse, back in my comfort zone, and it is a crime book, and it's called Everyone in My Family Has Killed Someone. This is actually a book I bought while I was on honeymoon. We were in the airport coming home. We flew out from Orlando, and I spotted this, and I was really intrigued. So I'm going to read the blurb to you, so you can see why it appealed to me, it lured me in. Everyone in my family has killed someone. Some of us, the high achievers, have killed more than once. I'm not trying to be dramatic, but it is the truth. Some of us are good, others are bad, and some just unfortunate. Have I killed someone? Yes, I have. Who was it? Let's get started. And then it says, everyone in my family has killed someone. My brother, my stepsister, my wife, my father, my mother, my sister-in-law, my uncle, my stepfather, my aunt, me. So, it's very different right from the jump. A lot more unique than a lot of crime books I've read recently. I absolutely love the prologue to this book. It starts so bold. It's just so good. It's one of those prologues that you instantly know you're going to like the book, because it's just out there. It just says it how it is. And it really gives you a flavour for the style of writing that will continue throughout the whole story. So the author is Benjamin Stevenson, and he is a stand-up comedian turned writer, very similar to Richard Osman with the Thursday Murder Club series. And I will say the humour, it's different type of humour, yeah, but it is very funny. It's really clever, it's really funny, it's very sharp, sarcastic in places. So I don't know if I mentioned, but the author is Australian as well, and I think it's set in Australia too. So I will say there are points in the book where it gets a little overly descriptive, which doesn't really fit with the tone and the pace of the rest of the story, because it does move pretty quick. Once you kind of get past that, it's not all the way through, it's just in bits, which is why I think it can trip you up. But it's also very meta, it's very self-aware, and it also breaks the fourth wall, or whatever the equivalent is for books. And it's just the twists and turns. You just have no idea what's coming. Genuinely no idea what's coming. And each chapter or section of the book relates to one of the people he mentioned in the blurb. So each member of his family gets their own section, and a lot happens in these sections. You've really got to pay attention, and you've really got to pay attention to everything, because it's one of those books where you don't want to miss any of the small details, because it's so clever that literally anything could come up down the line. So bear that in mind if you read this book. I feel like I can't really say too much more about the book, because if you read this, want it to be an organic experience. I don't want to preempt anything in there. I want you to, experience it for the first time yourself. It doesn't come as any surprise, really, that I rated this a 9 out of 10. I just think it's so clever and it's so unique, and I'm so happy that I just happened to go into that bookstore in Orlando Airport and find it. And you might think, why not a 10 out of 10? If you watched a video where I reviewed one of the Thursday Murder Club books, actually I think it was my January wrap-up, I also gave that a 9 out of 10. And I don't think this is better than that. I think it's just as good, but in a different way. The Thursday Murder Club books have more subplots that come in, and this, like I said, I'm not going to ruin anything. It's just a bit different than that. But yeah, I highly recommend that you read this book. And if you do, let me know what you think, and let me know if you guessed any of it along the way, because there were parts where I thought I knew what was happening. Nope. Nope. So yeah, that is book 4. Book 5, we are back to my trusty Kindle, and we're actually back on track now. So we're now, personal choice is the first part of my reading process, and this is self-development. And the book is The Unfair Advantage. And The Unfair Advantage is written by 2 entrepreneurs, Ash Ali and Hassan Kuba. Apologies. And the premise of the book is that they believe that everybody has an unfair advantage. Their kind of, I guess, their uniqueness, something that sets them apart from other people and gives them that edge. And in this case, it's all about starting your own business. So the book starts with their backgrounds, so you get an idea of how each of them started their journeys, and they are very different from each other, so it kind of already sets out this idea that they each brought their uniqueness to achieve success in different ways. And then you get the framework that they've created about this unfair advantage. And then finally, the last section of the book covers how, like, the more practical side as to how to go about starting your own business. I like the way the book starts. It gives the example of the founder of Snapchat and how he was born into privilege, and that kind of gave him the leg up to be able to start and pursue his idea. And they say, don't get us wrong, like, you have to have a good idea, but you can't deny the fact that having the money in the backing of his family didn't help. And this basically is just a very extreme example of an unfair advantage. And I like that. I think it's a very fresh take to, I think a lot of self-development books try and hide, especially ones about business, they try and hide this fact that a lot of founders had money to be able to start their businesses, whereas they are like, it happens, obviously, but all you've got to figure out is what your unfair advantage is that can help set you apart from other people as well. So yeah, I like that. It's different and it starts strong. And if you are uncertain about what an unfair advantage is, there are so many examples in part 1. You won't be confused by the end of it. And then part 2 is the audit. So their framework is a miles framework, and each letter stands for something that helps you to identify or work out what your unfair advantage could be. So M in miles is money. And then it goes through each one, and they give you examples and they go into explanation about it. I will say it's quite surface level. It doesn't really dig in that deeply into what each of them means. It's kind of self-explanatory. It's dragged out. It's quite a big section because I guess the whole book is about this unfair advantage, but it is quite lengthy for unnecessary reasons, I So within this framework, they go on to talk about the idea of a fixed versus a growth mindset. And in their opinion, they think that a growth mindset is too daydreamy or wishy-washy. And so they've invented, or they suggest, a third mindset, which is a reality growth mindset. And I think, obviously that's their personal interpretation of it, but it feels to me like they've just interpreted growth mindset as something different to make it fit their book. Because to me, a growth mindset is not daydreamy or wishy-washy at all. A growth mindset, how I interpret it, is that you're just more open-minded, you're adaptable, and you're flexible, and you don't see the world in black and white. Like they say, a growth mindset is always saying yet to everything, and that you're just assuming that things will come to you without having to work for it. But that's definitely not how I see a growth mindset, and maybe I was just taught it in a different way. I think I learned about it from Matthew Syed. He had a book called Black Box Thinking, which is... So yeah, I'm not sure I agree with that. It kind of feels to me like they're trying to invent something that gives them like a USP or a talking point in the book. So I'm not entirely sure I agree with that point. The overall impression I get from the book is that it's written for a much younger audience, or someone who just has no idea about business or how to even like begin. It doesn't ever really dig that deep into it. I think the last section of the book, where they talk about the practicalities of starting your own business and what you need to consider, especially around investors, the different types of investors, and what you need to prepare for each one to pitch. I think that's very valuable and very interesting, and I think a lot of people actually might not know that, but I think the rest of the book is pretty self-explanatory. If it was me, and I know the whole point is the unfair advantage is their selling point, but I would actually condense part 1 and 2 into a lot shorter and then expand section 3, but I know that's not what they were. That was not their intention. The rating for this book I found to be quite tricky because I'm not starting my own business, so I'm obviously not the target audience, and you'll have to check back in future videos to see why, or understand why I chose this book in the first place for this category. So yeah, I don't want to be too harsh, because I think if you are starting your own business, you might find this very useful. It's just, for me personally, I think that second bit is very drawn out for what it is and what it covers. So I'm going to be fair, I'm giving it a standard down the line 5 out of 10. Just average, run-of-the-mill book. It's not terrible, it's not going to hurt you, it's not groundbreaking, it's not amazing, and I don't want to be unfair for the target audience that it's aimed at, because it could be very insightful. So that is book 5. Book 6, we are back on the book list, and this time we are diving into horror. And surprise, surprise, it is a Stephen King book. I swear I cannot escape this man. And it was pointed out to me that Joe Hill, I read one of his books in a horror category for my last book list, is Stephen King's son, so I genuinely cannot escape this man. But I will say, at least this time it's an actual horror book, because the other Stephen King books I've read 4 of them at this point, are his crime ones. So the main character of this book, actually I don't think I even said what this book is called, I'm doing really well. This is called Elevation, and it's a pretty short book. I think it's register the extra weight he's holding. And this Dr. Bob at first doesn't believe him, but he soon comes around. And then on the other part of it, you've got Scott. He has some issues with his new neighbours called Deirdre and Missy, or Missy I think. But eventually they all become friends, and it's around, there's also a big race that's coming up as well. Where do I start with this book? It's classed as a horror, and the fact that it was really short, I thought it'd be really punchy, and it feels like it's going to go that way because it opens immediately with this condition. Like, there's no messing around. But does it ever get going? I don't know that it does, and I don't really know where the horror element comes into it. You know, I hear all the time that Stephen King is like the horror king, and I just don't see it. I just don't see it. Can someone please suggest a genuinely scary or good Stephen King book? Because he keeps getting to the top of these lists and I don't get it. I mean, don't get me wrong, I was intrigued to see what happened to him, but it never felt like there was any tension in the book. I never got this sense of unease, and maybe it's because it was so short. To be honest, there was a point in the book where I did find myself getting a little emotional. I'm not gonna lie. So maybe that does say something about the writing, that I managed to get invested enough to feel and care for whatever was happening. But I kept it, I think, also because with all the like preconceived ideas or expectations around Stephen King, I was always waiting for like a wild plot twist or something to come out, and it didn't really come. I actually looked up the definition of horror fiction because I was like, I must be missing something, and the definition says fiction that is intended to disturb, frighten or scare. And so for me, I don't think this book is should be classed as horror, and maybe other people reading it felt disturbed, but I didn't. I mean, I gave it a 5 out of 10 because it wasn't terrible. I think saying it was below average would be a bit too harsh. Yeah, it was such a meh book, and I think that's the only real word I can use to describe it, is meh. So, yeah, that was book 6. On to the next one. We have finally made it to the 7th and last book that I read in February. When I was choosing my books for the month, I knew that 7 in the shortest month of the year was very ambitious, and then I went and made life even harder for myself by choosing this to finish out. To be honest, Jo Nesbø is one of my favourite authors, and this detective series is one of my favourite series of all time, so I thought at least if I end with a book that I like really enjoyed or could potentially really enjoy, then I'd be able to read it quick. So that was my thought process behind it. So this is Killing Moon, and it is the 13th in the Harry Hole detective series. I'm going to read the blurb because it's the 13th book. So much has happened that I don't want to go off of my memory and then inadvertently spoil something from the previous books, so this is the safest way to do it. This killer is special. 2 young women are missing, strangers to each other but last seen at the same party. When the body of one of them is found with fresh stitches along her hairline, the hunt is on to find a murderer with particular tastes. Catching this criminal calls for a detective with a very particular mind. Only Harry Hole can stop this ingenious psychopath. But Harry is gone, struck off the force is, in case you didn't know what he looked like. I think he's such a creative writer, and the serial killers he comes up with, it's so inventive. It really is. One of the previous ones in the series, I think it was number 11, genuinely gave me nightmares. Like, it terrified me. Are you listening, Stephen King? I have a video coming up in a couple of weeks talking about that one, so make sure you check that out. Back to this book. I don't know how I feel about this one, because the killer in this one, it just seemed a bit too unrealistic, and the explanations behind it just felt a bit, I don't know, definitely wasn't as terrifying as other killers in the series. Yeah, I just felt like some of it was a little bit of a stretch. I'm aware that it probably sounds so vague, but I just do not want to spoil anything. And I will say that some of the violence in here, it feels like it's more just for effect than substance. It will make you feel a bit ill, though, so just be warned. Maybe don't read this and eat anything. It's not consistently violent, though, I will say that. You do get a break. In parts, it felt like nothing was really going on. Progress was slow, and so that obviously affects the pacing of the book itself. There is like a continuous theme with Harry Hole as a person throughout all of the books, but in this one it just made me just more angry and annoyed than anything, because it just felt like he wasn't doing anything. And one of the subplots I just didn't really rate at all. It felt it was a continuation of the last book, which was called The Knife, I'm pretty sure, and it just felt too convenient for a Joe Nesbo book. It doesn't usually, it just didn't work for me, and I didn't really like it at all. I will say, in the book's defense, that there's a seed that's planted throughout the book, and then when the final reveal comes, it's like, I actually genuinely got annoyed at the book, because I thought I had got it sussed out, and I thought I knew exactly what was going to happen, and I was annoyed at Joe Nesbo for becoming too predictable, because the other books in the series, if you've read any of them, you'll know, you can't, most of the time you've no idea who the killer is, what the reveal is going to be. And so I was so annoyed at this. And then when it all happened, I was like, fair play. I finished this book on the 29th of February, so it literally was the last day. And I was actually late for work, because the ending was really just like, and you can't stop at that point. It's just so good. So hats off to it. And I feel bad for ever doubting that he would do that, but it redeemed itself at the end a little bit. I'm not gonna lie, the ending of the book actually saved it. It stopped it from getting lower, and so I actually gave it a 7 out of 10. It's not terrible by any means, but I do think it's one of the weaker ones in the series. I just found it a little bit boring in places. Obviously, if you're reading the series, don't miss this one. I don't know if it's because this is the 13th one now, and I don't know if maybe it's just losing its legs a little bit. Like, I think the first one, I can't even remember when the first one was written, but a long time ago. But then I say that the last two in this series were The Thirst and The Knife, I think. Amazing, incredible books. So I don't know. And I don't know if there is a plan to continue the series on. I couldn't see any mention of it online, so who knows? Guess we'll have to wait and see. So that's it. We managed to trawl through all 7 books from February. Because I read 7, I've actually got myself back on track as ever, if you have any suggestions, or if you've read any of the books and you agree or disagree, let me know in the comments. I've included affiliate links for you for all of the books that I've mentioned, just to make it a bit easier for